So look, I know I said I was supposed to be talking about billionaires, but we need to talk about this bullshit for a second, and how Candace Owens had a quote-unquote meeting with America's favorite sweetheart Erika Kirk. A private meeting teased secrecy, hints of revelation, carefully chosen words like clarity, truth, and conversation. And that's exactly how the meeting between Candace Owens and Erika Kirk was framed. And then when something is marketed as serious, people are going to treat it seriously. The problem is, after everything was said and done, it didn't feel serious at all. It felt theatrical. And when truth becomes theater, it's worth asking why. Candace Owens doesn't position herself as just a pundit or influencer. She calls herself a journalist, someone who challenges narratives, someone who exposes what others are afraid to touch. And as much as I like to give Candace her investigative chops as a journalist, she still be shucking and jiving for white folks. Because the truth is, she's always been performative for the white man. That's who she is and has always been. Can't ever forget that no matter how much she tries to seem cool. So when she signals a private meeting like this, people naturally expect investigation, confrontation, receipts, or at minimum, a clear takeaway that expectation didn't come from nowhere. She cultivated it. You don't get to build a brand on hard truths and then be surprised when people ask for them. After the meeting, Candace returns to her platform. So, after all the buildup, I actually sat down and listened to the podcast episode that came out after this meeting. An hour and 14 minutes, and I want to be honest, it was one of the most frustrating listens I've had in a long time. Because when you commit that much time to something that's been framed as important, you expect something of value to come out of it. What we got instead was rambling. A lot of talk, very little content. The episode doesn't move with intention. There's no structure, no clear thesis, no moment where Candace says, here's what changed after the meeting. Instead, it feels like she's constantly circling the subject without ever landing on it. She talks around the issue, she gestures at seriousness, she uses a lot of words to ultimately say very little, and that's when it starts to feel less like journalism and more like content filler. Why it feels like an advertisement. At a certain point, the episode starts to resemble a commercial. Not necessarily for a product, but for Candace herself. There's a lot of self-positioning, reaffirming her credibility, reminding the audience of her intentions, and insulating herself from criticism, but very little accountability, very little new information. It feels like the goal wasn't to inform the audience, it was to reassure them, and reassurance without substance doesn't build trust, it erodes it. Word salad as a strategy, what stood out the most was the sheer amount of word salad. Long sentences that don't resolve, thoughts that trail off, statements that sound meaningful but collapse when you try to summarize them. Ask yourself this, if you had to explain what was actually learned from that episode in one sentence, could you? Most people can't. And that's not because they weren't paying attention, it's because there was nothing solid to grab onto.
And that's where we're at right now. That's just the stage that we are at. That is not what we are getting from them. That is like, I just feel like that's really important to let you guys know. Let the gaslighting stop. They have what you have. Because I don't know why I'm like this. I was like, you might need a new lawyer. I was like, because this person's trying to sell to you that this is solid. One of the rules that me and my husband have is that if you have a lawyer that tells you like you're 100% gonna win, it's very clear that you're gonna win, you need a new lawyer. One solitary
This is
person,
a certified hood classic. Trapaholics mixtapes.
He was on the roof. Remember the guy that's like, oh, there's somebody on the roof, and he saw. He said what he saw was a small
Trapaholics, real trap shit. Damn, son, where'd you find this? Trapaholics, bitch.
And instead of clarity, what we get is long-winded commentary, vague phrasing, circular explanations, and very little substance. No definitive answers, no clear accountability, no meaningful conclusions, just words filling space. And that's where the disconnect begins, because if this meeting mattered, why did it produce so little? Here's where skepticism comes in. People aren't upset because they weren't given private details. They're skeptical because the outcome didn't match the buildup. When something is teased as consequential but delivered as incoherent, it creates suspicion. Not because people are conspiratorial, but because optics matter. And the optics here don't align with truth-seeking. Let me be very clear before anyone misrepresents this. I am not saying Candace Owens was paid off. I am not claiming financial transactions occurred. What I am saying is that this meeting functioned like a smokescreen. A smokescreen doesn't need lies to work, it just needs distraction. It slows down narratives, muddies timelines, and reframes focus away from accountability. When the audience is debating what the meeting meant instead of what was actually addressed, the smokescreen has already done its job. Candace Owens is very good at projecting certainty, but conviction isn't the same as consistency. Over time, her strongest positions often seem to align with whoever holds the audience, whoever controls the platform, or whoever offers the next opportunity that doesn't make her unintelligent. It makes her adaptive, and adaptability is valuable, but it's not journalism. Journalism doesn't bend to incentives, performance does, and in this situation, performance feels far more present than investigation. Here's an uncomfortable truth: sometimes meetings aren't meant to solve anything. They're meant to create the appearance of action, relieve public pressure, and allow everyone involved to move on quietly. If enough time passes without new information, outrage fades, not because questions were answered, but because attention moved on. That's not accountability, that's exhaustion. The real damage here isn't drama, it's credibility. When someone builds their platform on truth-telling, but delivers vagueness when it matters, people start questioning everything else they say, not just about this situation, but about their entire body of work. And once trust erodes, no amount of rhetoric can rebuild it. This situation isn't unique to Candace Owens. It's part of a larger trend where journalism blurs into branding, accountability becomes content, and truth becomes optional. Meetings become marketing, silence becomes strategy, and confusion becomes currency. And that should concern everyone, regardless of politics. So was this meeting historic? Maybe. But based on what we've actually seen, it looks far more like a smokescreen than a breakthrough. And the thing about smokescreens is they only work temporarily, because time has a way of exposing what was avoided, and when truth finally resurfaces, the performance won't matter anymore. When you zoom out and look at the full picture, this situation stops being confusing and starts being revealing. A public feud, serious claims being entertained, then suddenly in a private meeting, followed by vague language, filler content, and no real answers. That's not what accountability looks like, that's what containment looks like. And again, I'm not saying anyone committed a crime, took a bribe, or exchanged anything behind the scenes. That's not the point. The point is the outcome. Candace stopped digging. The narrative cooled off. The public was left with questions instead of clarity. For a woman who brands herself as a journalist, that matters. Because journalism isn't about vibes. It isn't about access. And it definitely isn't about private conversations when the public is asking public questions. A lot of people believed Candace Owens was different, that she couldn't be swayed, that she was fighting for truth no matter who it upset. But moments like this remind us of something uncomfortable. Nobody with a platform this big operates outside of incentives. Money, access, influence, though they don't just shape what gets said, they shape what doesn't get said. And that's why this meeting felt like a smokescreen. Not because it proved anything, but because it accomplished exactly what smokescreens are meant to do. It slowed the conversation, it blurred the focus, and it bought time. Time will tell what really happened here, it always does. But until then, skepticism isn't hatred, like it's responsibility. And if asking for clarity makes people uncomfortable, maybe that tells us more than any podcast episode ever could. Here's the part that really doesn't sit right with people. And honestly, it shouldn't. Why was this meeting private at all? If the goal was clarity, transparency, or correcting the record, there is no logical reason this conversation needed to happen behind closed doors, especially when just a week earlier these two were positioned as being on completely opposite sides. The sudden shift in the narrative. Not long ago, Candace Owens was publicly entertaining the idea that Charlie's death involved internal wrongdoing, a claim she framed as questioning inconsistencies and demanding accountability, not stating facts outright. Meanwhile, Erika Kirk pushed back hard. Her stance was that Candace's approach was inappropriate, harmful, or irresponsible, depending on how you interpret her comments, and that the speculation needed to stop. At that point, the internet saw them as ideological enemies. So when two people who were publicly at odds suddenly retreat into a private meeting, the question becomes unavoidable. What changed? Because it clearly wasn't the evidence, none was presented afterward. From people's champion to business as usual. A lot of Candace's supporters believed she was different, that she wasn't afraid to follow a story wherever it led, that she wouldn't be intimidated, that she wouldn't fold. But for many people watching this play out, the meeting marked a shift, not toward truth, but toward containment. And once you listen to Candace's podcast after the meeting, it becomes harder to ignore. There's no bombshell, no clarification, no retraction backed by new information. Just filler, word salad, generalities, a lot of talking that ultimately goes nowhere. That's when people started realizing this wasn't about resolution, it was about redirection. Why this feels strategic, not accidental. Again, to be clear, this is analysis, not an allegation. But the outcome of the meeting benefited one thing above all else. Candace stopped digging. Not permanently, maybe, but for now. And that's often all that's needed. You don't have to silence someone forever. You just have to slow them down long enough for public attention to move on. That's why this didn't feel like accountability. It felt like damage control. The reality people don't want to admit, here's the uncomfortable realization a lot of people had. Candace Owens isn't immune to incentives. She operates in the same media ecosystem as everyone else, one where access, money, and influence matter. And once people recognized that, the illusion of her being some people's champion started to crack. Not because she changed overnight, but because the situation exposed how the system actually works. Why this matters beyond this story, this isn't just about Candace or Erika. It's about how public accountability gets neutralized. You don't always need lies. You don't always need censorship. Sometimes all you need is a private meeting, vague language, and enough time, and eventually the conversation dies. Not because it was resolved, but because it was managed. Transition line back to main essay. And that's why this meeting didn't feel like progress. It felt like a pause, a reset, a strategic timeout. And when journalism starts looking like negotiation, people are right to question whose interests are really being served. An hour and 14 minutes is a commitment. If you're going to ask that much of your audience, especially after hyping up a private meeting tied to serious allegations, you owe them clarity, not vibes, not rambling, not self-defense masquerading as reflection. Clarity. And the absence of clarity here feels intentional, because when nothing concrete is said, nothing can be challenged. The most revealing thing about that podcast isn't what Candace said, it's what she didn't say. No direct follow-up on the most serious point she previously entertained. No explanation of what specifically changed her perspective. No transparent reasoning, just a lot of noise, stretched across more than an hour. That's not an accident. That's a choice. Transition back to the bigger point. So when people say this meeting felt like a smokescreen, it's not because they're being dramatic. It's because after all that time, all that build-up, and all that talk, nothing of importance actually happened. And when nothing is delivered this deliberately, it stops feeling unintentional. It starts feeling strategic. But what do y'all think? Am I tweaking again? Or does it really feel like this whole interview was just another distraction from something bigger that nobody wants to actually address? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. But from where I'm sitting, an hour and 14 minutes of talking with nothing to show for it doesn't feel like clarity. It feels like misdirection. But what the hell do I know? I've got like 36 subscribers and a camera. Still, I rock with y'all heavy, and I appreciate everyone who actually watches, listens, and thinks for themselves. Let me know what you think in the comments, respectfully. I'll see y'all in the next video.
Okay, everybody, Shabbat Shalom. I just want to say Shabbat Shalom to everybody back at home. Happy Hanukkah to our greatest friends and allies. And, this is a good time to mention that Israel does have a right to defend itself. Tucker Carlson is Adolf Hitler. And TikTok does need to be purchased by the Mossad. It's just how I'm feeling today. I am not different. Maybe you are different. Welcome back to Candace.